I'm going to talk to you about qualitative comparative analysis and how it might be used to develop donor profiles for fundraising. And you might be thinking, what does that have to do with conflict or collaboration? Actually, the idea came to me as I was working on a project on giving circles, which is a form of collaborative philanthropy. I'll explain that in a minute. And so this data comes out of that project on collaboration, and I'll link back to sort of the collaborative aspects of it in a moment. But I just want to acknowledge that this research has been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I've worked in partnership with the Indiana University Women's Philanthropy Institute, and so they've been a partner on this as well. The Collective Giving Research Group is a research group that I established with Angie Eikenberry and a couple of other colleagues in order to sort of provide a home for collective giving research. And so we host quarterly webinars and have been building community around this idea of collective giving or collaborative philanthropy. So I wanted to acknowledge that too. So the Giving Circles project, to just kind of give you some perspective on this, oops. There's a chair there. This is a multi-year project, and it's actually been funded by a couple of different funders. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. And the Gates Foundation has actually funded 2 rounds of work. What we started to do was say, well, so what is the landscape of giving circles in the United States? And giving circles are a form of collaborative philanthropy where people pool their money and decide collectively where to give it away. It's not attached to any specific organization, but the idea is that it's a grassroots movement that gets money into local organizations. What we found in our landscape scan of giving circles in the United States was that most of the money, so about 84% of funds, actually stay in local communities. Beyond that, giving circles, these groups of people who are pooling their money to give it away, are doing things beyond just giving money. So they are also engaging with organizations they fund, they're doing community work, sometimes they're joining the boards of organizations they fund, and they're providing opportunities as well for organizations that don't typically get institutional philanthropy or funds from institutional philanthropy to get some sort of grant funding in. And so this movement is really, again, grassroots, and it's an effort by people to sort of harness the power of collective impact, so pooling their money and giving it away without dealing so much with the institutional aspects of philanthropy, so foundations, things like that. It's much more connected and engaged. In this landscape project, we had a team of graduate students who put together a database of giving circles in the United States. That's where we were focused. There was additional research going on giving circles in Canada, and there are also some projects looking at giving circles in Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. In any case, we focused on the US, found that since the last time this was done, the number of giving circles has tripled. And so I'll come back to why this is important in a minute. But the punchline will be we see more and more engagement in this type of philanthropy, and it seems that people who engage in giving circles also have different ways of giving their money. The second part of our project that was funded by the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation was to look at whether giving circles were hosted and what that looked like from a host perspective. So about half of giving circles in the US use a fiscal agent that is not the giving circle. So it might be a community foundation. There are a couple of other types of hosts we can see. And so we wanted to know, well, what do these hosts really think about giving circles? How are they administering them? How are they managing them? And are they getting a return on investment? The thing that we found out was that foundations in particular, the most popular type of host, and community foundations specifically, have no idea what they're doing. There's nothing consistent. There's no best practice in how to host a giving circle. And they're often not measuring the return on investment. They're not saying, this is what it cost me and this is what I'm getting back from it. Typically, they'll take an administrative fee of 1% to 4% to manage the funds in the giving circle. But one of the things that we kept hearing over and over again was, hey, we don't really want to delve into this right now. We see this as a pathway to get donors into giving and into philanthropy. So we're going to invest in giving circles with the hope that the people who are in these giving circles are going to become philanthropists and embedded in the community foundation. So they'll continue to give and give at higher rates as they grow in their professions or whatever it is they're doing. And so the dynamics of hosting, it's all over the place. Nobody really knows what they're doing. But again, community foundations are trying to get into this space so that they can cultivate donors. At the same time, we're hearing from donors that often community foundations and other institutional funders don't really understand what the Giving Circle is about, that it's not really a donor-advised fund, which is set up where I put funds in and then help decide where they go in terms of charities. A lot of community foundations have this model of giving. The Giving Circle is actually much more than that, and in some cases, again, we see lots of sort of non-financial impacts of Giving Circles, things like mentoring and engagement with the grantees. And so there's this real dynamic, right, that says the Giving Circles need help with, fiscal administration in some cases, but the current institutions aren't really set up to deal with them. The other thing that we did was we surveyed Giving Circle members and a sample of non-Giving Circle members to look at how giving was associated with being in a giving, or how my overall philanthropy was associated with being in a Giving Circle. We asked a number of questions on this, and I'll get into the survey in just a moment when I get to the data, but this is the data that we're going to focus on here, looking at individual level effects of being in a Giving Circle and looking at sort of philanthropic behavior of individuals versus the group, which is the Giving Circle, or the host. Another thing that I'll say that I'm working on, Gates Foundation was really interested in one of our findings. We found more people of color were in Giving Circles than had been previously found about 10 years ago, and Angie Eikenberry and Jessica Behrman were working on in this space. And so we're seeing more donors of color, Giving Circle members of color. We're seeing younger donors, and the Gates Foundation has funded an additional study to look at African American Giving Circles to see what's happening. Why are we seeing more African American Giving Circles? And so I'm engaged in a project, and I'm still collecting data on that. And I'll touch on it a little bit here. So I've already said this, Giving Circles are made up of people who pool their donations. They decide together where and how funds are given. Often there's a deliberative process where people actually sit down and they talk about different potential grantees, often nonprofit organizations, usually local. And then the Giving Circle's purpose is primarily philanthropic. In addition to impacts other than financial on the grantee, there are often opportunities for learning and engagement of Giving Circle members. And actually in the African American Giving Circles project, one of the things that has come out of this is that Giving Circles provide a space for people to engage and discuss in philanthropy. So these are Giving Circles made up of entirely African American people. And so what's coming out of our interviews and surveys is that this is a space to really engage in a way that is authentic and in a way that feels safe. And so Giving Circles are also giving benefits to members in addition to connecting them to people in the community. These are just a couple of different examples of Giving Circles. What we've seen historically is that Giving Circles have been driven by, the membership has been driven by affluent, educated, white, high-income women. That was the primary group where this started. We still see that group dominating Giving Circle membership, though it has become more diverse over time. We're seeing even more diversity just in the last couple of years as we've been studying this. We also see a lot of Giving Circles built around affinities, so whether it's race, ethnicity, gender, we even have a couple of men's Giving Circles that have popped up that didn't exist 10 years ago, but now we're starting to see. And some Giving Circles are community-based, so people just live in the same geography and they want to get together and pool their money and give it away. The other important thing to remember is that this is independent of any type of organization. So we didn't form a Giving Circle to raise money for the Syracuse University Foundation. Instead, we formed a Giving Circle to explore opportunities to fund maybe in our local community or in some target area. And this is important because there are a lot of collective giving groups that have sprouted up around the country. Tiffany Circle is a notable example. This is a group of high net worth women who raise money for the American Red Cross. Usually it's $1 million or more per person. This is not that. The other thing I would say about Giving Circles is that this includes a wide spectrum of people from different backgrounds. So we found in our landscape survey that the average donation to a Giving Circle was about $400 per year. So that's not a lot of money. If we think about philanthropy being, often when you ask people, what is philanthropy? They think about very wealthy people giving away large sums of money. And Giving Circles present an opportunity to engage with like-minded people, to collaborate with like-minded people, and to do it even when your income may not be such that you can give $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a quarter away. So we see this too, this grassroots philanthropy is an opportunity to perhaps also think about decolonizing philanthropy. So there's been a lot of talk recently about decolonizing wealth. So Edgar Villanueva has written this book about decolonizing wealth. And we're kind of seeing this as an opportunity to decolonize philanthropy, not so much the sources of wealth that fuel philanthropy, but the way that philanthropy is practiced because it brings in people who are not the usual suspects. And so that raises a lot of questions for us about who are these philanthropists and how do they give, where do they give? In terms of looking at the individual philanthropists, what we know is that people are likely to give to those who have a shared identity. There are a number of studies in sociology, also in philanthropic studies and interdisciplinary studies that show us that people will give to people who look like them, right? So if I'm a woman, I might give to women and girls. If I'm a person of color, I might give to communities of color. LGBTQ, I might give to the LGBTQ community. In a paper that Angie Eikenberry and I are publishing, or that was just accepted to Voluntas, we found that this is also true in our sample of donors. We see that people are likely to give to those that have a shared identity. We looked at people of color, people who identified as LGBTQ, and women. And we said, we looked at whether women gave to women and girls, people of color gave to people of color, and LGBTQ gave to LGBTQ. We did find that overall in our sample, this was true for all groups. One of the interesting things that we found was that people who were engaged in this collective giving or this collaborative philanthropy were also likely to give to people that didn't look like them at statistically significantly higher rates. And so this was really important to us because another thing that we have found was that Giving Circle members tend to be more strategic in how they deploy their resources. So for example, if you give a list of, why do you choose to give, overwhelmingly Giving Circle members will choose things like I wanted to leverage my money and make my money go further, I wanted to build connections, I wanted to learn, lots of things really about strategically deploying resources. When you ask people who are not in Giving Circles why they do that, they often will say things like, I felt like it, or somebody asked me to, or something that is much more sort of in the moment. And so this tells us that Giving Circle members are perhaps doing something a little bit differently. What we can't establish quite yet is whether Giving Circles are schools of philanthropy where people learn to be philanthropic in a strategic way, or whether they are pools of philanthropy that just bring people in that already have this predisposition. In any case, the takeaway from this paper is that we know identity matters in the selection of philanthropic causes, but estimating the average effects of identities doesn't account for intersectionality. And so in this paper for Voluntas, we ran a pretty simple model that looked at, what is the effect of demographic variables on where I choose to give, what is the effect of being in a giving circle. And we had significant results, but we said, this is great, and we can establish this sort of bonding versus bridging, but what about people who have multiple identities? What does it mean for them to give? And so this part of the work is rooted really in sort of my interest in, bringing in more communities of color and previously marginalized or currently marginalized communities into philanthropy, because this presents an opportunity to build resources and distribute those resources also to marginalized communities. And so we started thinking about this, or I started thinking about this, and when we're modeling the average effects, we're running a regression, we look at different things like gender, race and ethnicity, and financial position separately. We look at the average effect of each, holding the others constant. And so this is okay to sort of isolate, how women give, or how people of color give, or, how wealthy people give. But it doesn't account for, what if I am a wealthy Black woman, right? My identity is likely different than a wealthy white woman or a poor Black woman. And so how do these things combine within a case, and how are they associated with giving? That's sort of the question that I'm asking in this paper. How can we look at these things together rather than the average effect of each? So I did my PhD at the University of Arizona. While I was at the University of Arizona, Charles Reagan was there. Charles Reagan developed a method called Qualitative Comparative Analysis. The idea behind this method is that you set theoretic logic to untangle causal complexity. So what this means is that you start with a case, and you look within that case to see if a combination of causal variables are associated with an outcome. And so this is different than traditional regression analysis, which looks at the effect of individual variables across cases. So we're starting within the case and then looking to see if those combinations of causal conditions are consistent across cases rather than looking at the effect of a particular variable on a case. What this method does is it allows us to emphasize diversity in cases. So rather than smoothing out the noise becomes important in understanding how different combinations are associated with different outcomes. And we look for necessary and sufficient conditions. So a necessary condition is one that always precedes an outcome. So if I'm thinking about if I think only women give to women and girls, being a woman always precedes giving to women and girls. That's not true. It's close, but not true. And then I can think about sufficient conditions, something that can precede an outcome, right? And what often happens is that there's a combination of conditions that precede an outcome. So being a wealthy woman with an education might combine in one person and be associated with giving to women and girls. So the question is, how do conditions combine within a case to lead to a specified outcome, and are these combinations consistent across outcomes? Now, this isn't, a method that we use to think about making predictive models. Instead, we can think about it looking for associations, right? And when associations are common or we keep seeing them, we might start to think there's something there. And I'll get more into that in just a second. But how do conditions combine within a case to lead to a specified outcome? A couple more differences about correlation from correlation-based analysis. It's not about the net effect of a variable. It's not about the effect of gender holding everything else constant. Also, these models don't assume symmetry. So if I have an outcome, I'm going to talk about giving to women and girls today, that outcome, the opposite of, so if I get a set of conditions that lead to giving to women and girls, the absence of those conditions does not necessarily lead to not giving to women and girls. And I'm going to go through a couple of examples so you can see what that means. The other thing that's really important about this is equifinality. So we can have multiple overlapping conditions that don't negate, or non-overlapping conditions that don't negate each other. So again, because we're looking within cases and seeing if combinations consistently are associated with an outcome, we're not looking at average effects, and we can have multiple paths or recipes, Charles likes to call them, to get to an outcome. And so that becomes important, particularly as we're trying to understand causal complexity, what leads to a particular outcome. We can have multiple solutions. So just give you a little bit of a sense of how the analysis works. We pick a set of variables, right? We pick a set of variables. It started off as CRISP-QCA, so dichotomous variables, where you're either a 0 or a 1. And then we looked to see whether a combination of zeros and ones was consistently associated with an outcome. And so consistency refers to whether combinations are consistent across cases. Coverage refers to how much of the outcome does this combination cover. And so we can think about this in a couple of ways. This would be an outcome, say giving to women and girls, and a solution, maybe it's a combination of your gender, your educational status, or your wealth, and we can see that there's high consistency. Most of the solution is inside the outcome, meaning that most people with this combination of variables actually give to women and girls, right? So they're associated with that outcome. However, it doesn't cover a lot of the outcome, right? So we have high consistency and low coverage. There are other things going on here that are leading to this outcome of giving to women and girls, for example. And so we want to go and look, what are those other solutions, right? They, again, might not be overlapping. We can also think about solutions that have low consistency but high coverage. So this might be men in a giving circle as the solution, the outcome, again, giving to women and girls. And what we see is that there are a lot of people included in the solution that have that combination of variables inside of them that don't lead to a particular outcome. And so there we would say that this combination of variables is less consistent than with the outcome of interest, but we're still seeing some association, right? But it also covers a lot of the outcome, right? And so depending on the question we're asking, what we want to know, we'll start to think about what matters, consistency or coverage. And I'll walk you through a specific example using specific variables, but I just wanted to throw this out there. The other thing I'll say about QCA is it was originally developed for small to medium end research to analyze that data in a systematic way. In the last 10 years or so, we've seen a lot of large N studies using QCA, again, to untangle this causal complexity. And Piers-Fist has done quite a bit of work in sort of moving QCA from being the small to medium N research method to thinking about it with larger data sets. And so I'm going to apply it to a larger data set today. So the data that we used, or that I used for this particular paper, and I keep saying we because I collected this data with the Collective Giving Research Group, but I've written this paper by myself. So we did a survey of Giving Circle members. We ended up having about 1,000, and then a comparison group that we drew from Amazon MTurk, and I'd be happy to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that at the end. But just so we had a sample of Giving Circle members, and then we had a comparison group of people who were engaged in philanthropic behavior, but were not members of Giving Circle, so that we could make some statements about, whether being in a Giving Circle was associated with specific behaviors. We asked them about their overall giving behavior, so their overall philanthropy in terms of giving time and money. So overall, and then also within the Giving Circle, if they were a Giving Circle member. For the Giving Circle members, we asked about opportunities and things that they got from the Giving Circle. So what were the advantages? Why did they join? What sorts of activities are they engaged in? We also asked about social networks. So my methodological expertise is in network analysis. And one of the things that we were able to do was to develop questions to assess people's philanthropic social networks, to see who they went to for advice on philanthropy. And in a different paper I'm not going to talk about today, one of the things that we found is that people in Giving Circles are much more targeted in who they go to for philanthropic advice, including that they include non-family members and non-friends in these philanthropic social networks. For the comparison group, we see people going to their family or going to people that are very close to them about getting, philanthropic advice. This is important because the people in Giving Circles are bringing new information into their networks, and they're able to bridge into other communities. We also see Giving Circle member networks are more diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, and a couple of other elements, whereas these comparison group philanthropic networks are not. And then we asked about civic and political activities and beliefs. Giving Circle members tend to be more active civically. They tend to be more politically active. And then we have a number of demographic questions so that we can compare across groups. So bringing us to giving to women and girls, one of the observations that we made was we see a lot of giving to women and girls among Giving Circle members, which are here in blue. And then we see non-Giving Circle members are giving to women and girls. We asked, which of these causes do you regularly give to, or have you given to recently? And so one of the interesting things was that in the comparison group, 20% of women said that they gave to women and girls causes. 10% of men said that they gave to women and girls causes. And so we thought that this was pretty interesting, the discrepancy between Giving Circle members and the comparison group, but also between men and women. And what this tells us, and what pans out in all kinds of models when we control for all types of other variables, is that women are more likely to give to women and girls causes. So going back to that bonding hypothesis, I give to people who look like me. But this finding was really interesting because it supports the idea that, I also give to people who don't look like me. So men in Giving Circles seem to have something different going on. And we wondered if there was some sort of combination of variables that led to giving to women and girls. Does something else combine with men? And so this is where I started with this paper. I've also run this analysis on giving to people of color and giving to the LGBTQ community. We see similar charts as this. But we said, okay, what is it? What are the differences here? Why are these people giving to women and girls at higher rates? Is it something about that combination of demographic variables that's leading to that? So in this QCA analysis, I have actually two outcome sets. So the outcome is the thing that I'm looking for. What is associated with this thing? And I have giving to women and girls and does not give to women and girls. Remember that in QCA, these are not sort of perfect opposites. There's not symmetry. So the things that lead to not giving to women and girls are not the opposite of things that do lead to women and girls. So running both analyses can be illuminating in understanding giving to a particular group. Again, in this case, women and girls. The causal sets that I'm looking at here are membership in a giving circle. So this is a binary, or it's a dichotomous variable where it's a 0 if you're not in a giving circle and a 1 if you are in a giving circle. Gender, so female is the 1, non-female is 0. In our sample, we have a couple of people who identify as non-female, and they don't quite fit into the male spectrum. There's only a handful of cases, so we can think about this as being mostly male-female. And then we looked at ethnicity, white, non-white, and so the non-white categories include pretty much all people of color, and so we see, people who are African American, we see people who are Asian American. We also put people who identify as Hispanic or multiracial into this category to look at the white versus non-white. We look at this because philanthropy research, there's a lot of research to indicate that people who are white are more likely to be philanthropists. Part of that, I think, is driven by those are the people who are probably asked to give, right? The other piece to this is that the giving circle's history has been, again, white, affluent, educated women. And then we looked at income. So in philanthropic research, this cutoff of $100,000 is seen as sort of affluent. If you make more than $100,000, you're counted as affluent, not high net wealth, but affluent. And so this is a standard cutoff used in research. And so we wanted to look, again, if you make less than $100,000 or more than $100,000, are you likely to give to women and girls in combination with other variables? Age, we looked at cutoffs at 40 years, and so this is another sort of standard thing that we see. People who are over the age of 40 are more likely to be seen as philanthropists. And then we also looked at the proportion of other gender in their giving circle. So we asked them about their giving circle, what proportion. So this is actually a fuzzy set variable, and that basically just means is that rather than having a 0 or 1, there's a range of values. And I can talk about calibrating that if any of you are interested at the end.
So why not religion?
I just didn't include it in the model. So the religion variable, we did ask about religion, and we asked about religiosity. So how often do you attend services? It just hasn't occurred to me to put it down, but I can. Yeah. So I'll get back to you. Yeah. We also have information about political ideology, how conservative they are, or liberal on a scale that we could also put in. So there are lots of variables that could go in. These are ones that we also have found are important in sort of other analysis. So we run this analysis and we get back an output that looks like this, right? You can't read it and it's really boring, and it actually does come back in Courier New, right? So this is a legacy of Charles preferring that. And so what I would say about this is that we have a consistency cutoff. This is set at a relatively low threshold because the analysis I'm still engaged in, obviously I could add more variables. But what it means is that you have to have, in order for a solution to be included, about 70% or more of the cases in that exhibit those combination of causal variables. So 70%, for each solution, they had to have 70% or more of cases with this combination of causal variables that led to an outcome, right? So it says we're really looking at consistency, whether these things are occurring across cases. And then when we're thinking about these measures here, we have solution coverage. It's about 57%. So this accounts for about 57% of all of the cases that we used for analysis, and that the consistency is about 80%, right, overall. So then we have these numbers. We have raw coverage. So each solution, and I'll explain those in a second, covers this much of the circle. So if we think about those sort of overlapping circles earlier, 13% raw coverage, then we have the unique coverage, so that just this combination accounts for example, 8% of the total solution. But because it brings in variables that are also included in other solutions, these solutions are overlapping. And then we look at consistency, how many of the cases with this particular combination of variables led to the outcome of giving to women and girls. Now, these are sort of the codes or the variable names that I use. One thing that I will point out before I go to the next slide is that this little hash right here means the absence of. So the absence of people over the age of 40 combined with the absence of mixed gender networks, the absence of being white, being female, because there's no hash there, and being a Giving Circle member leads to women and girls. So if we want to think about this in English, these are the 6 solutions that consistently are associated with giving to women and girls. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of them, but just know that it tended to be really driven by females, right? So women are still driving this giving to women and girls. In 4 of the combinations, the female is present. So females combining with these other variables in order to lead to giving to women and girls. So from a fundraising perspective, if I'm thinking about who donors give to and I'm going out to raise money, I want to start to look at these and pick them apart. So if I look at one of the solutions, 40 plus females who are Giving Circle members with a high proportion of non-women in Giving Circles are giving to women and girls, that becomes really interesting because the raw coverage is about 30% of that circle. So people with this particular combination of variables cover about 30% of my solution of giving to women and girls. So that's interesting from a fundraising perspective because I'm getting a lot of coverage there. But what's more interesting is that the consistency is about 80%. So about 80% of people who have these causal or these variables are giving to women and girls. As a fundraiser, that tells me that these are people I should probably be targeting for dollars, right? So fundraising, we're thinking about it, it's a really crowded market space, and any advantage you can get is great to get more money into your organization. The other thing I would say is that we're using a lot of data analytics in fundraising right now, but it is typically focused on developing these predictive models that look at the average effects of, say, being a female, being in a giving circle, rather than sort of the combination of effects. And so again, that doesn't account for intersectionality of donors. And while it might give you a slight advantage in understanding who your donors are, this may actually provide you with a better picture to develop a donor profile and know what types of people to go after. Another solution that came up that was really interesting was people who are under 40, non-female, so these are mostly men, non-white, Giving Circle member, and a high proportion of women in their Giving Circle. These people also give to women and girls. They only cover less than 1% of the solution, right? So that's not a lot. We're not super interested in that. That's not very interesting. But what is interesting is that 83% of people with this profile are giving to women and girls causes. And so this is interesting from a research perspective because we know that men are less likely to give to women and girls, but we see this combination is consistently leading to giving to women and girls. If I put on my fundraiser hat, this becomes even more interesting because all of a sudden I've got this pool of men to think about recruiting into my organization as a donor, right? So it's not all men that I'm going to go after, and I'll show you a bit more about that in a second, but there is a certain subset of men that might be more likely to give to my cause, might be warm to my cause, is the term that we use in philanthropy, and so I'm going to look for people who look like this. I may dig in my existing database, or I may buy data. There are lots of different ways I can get donor data in, but I can start to build profiles and run analysis to see who else fits this profile that I haven't contacted yet to sell my organization, right, to raise money. The other thing that I looked at was who does not give to women and girls, and it turns out lots of different types of people don't give to women and girls. A lot of this is driven by non-Giving Circle members because, again, they're not particularly targeted in how they use their philanthropic dollars. And so we see sort of lots of combinations that have no Giving Circle membership here, here, here. And so this is being driven by those people who are not Giving Circles. Again, less likely we saw from the table with just the percentages to give to women and girls. This is not unexpected. And we see the solution coverage is about 80% of people who don't give to women and girls, which is consistent with the figures that I showed you before, and that the consistency is about 87%. So we can get a really good sense of who is not giving to women and girls. Why would we care about that? Well, maybe those are donors that we don't want to chase, or those are donors we can reach out to either educate or figure out why they're not giving to this particular cause. One of the things that was really funny to me, or maybe shouldn't be funny, but was interesting, was that one of the top groups that don't give to women and girls were people who are not female and not Giving Circle members. So these were predominantly male, non-Giving Circle members from the comparison group, in addition to white, donors who had less than $100,000 in income and were not in a giving circle. So these are also people who are not giving to women and girls causes. And so here, for the non-female, non-giving circle member, we can see that it covers 37% of that part of the sample that is not giving to women and girls. And this is interesting because it sort of confirms some ideas that we have that men are not giving to these causes. But even more interesting, 90% of the people who fit this profile do not give to women and girls causes. That's pretty interesting. And again, if I'm putting on my fundraising hat, maybe I'm going to say that these are not the dollars that I'm going to chase. I have limited resources to raise money, and so these are not the usual suspects. Maybe I would go out and educate and develop focus groups, but these are maybe not the primary group I'm going to start to bring into my giving circle. The other one that was interesting that covers 56% in raw coverage, and again, this is an overlapping solution, was this people who are white or identify as white, have income of less than $100,000 and are non-giving circle members. Again, a lot of coverage, but also really high consistency. So almost 90% of people who fit this profile also do not give to women and girls causes. So again, if I'm raising money for women and girls causes and I have limited resources, this might not be the group that I target initially. There's also some thought about marital status. And so we also know that married men are more likely to give to women and girls causes, particularly if they have children. I did not include that in this model. So what do we do with this? Why do we care about this? From the field perspective, we can look at donor data across organizations, right? So we can build donor profiles with existing data and uncover patterns. Who is giving to what? Who might we be targeting? Right now, the data analytics firms that sell data use predictive modeling. They're using regression models to predict who might give to your organization, but that doesn't give sort of this holistic view of donor behavior. QCA is a tool that can help us build these donor profiles from the case up. So starting with the person who's we're going to solicit people for money, right? We're not soliciting independent, variables. So we can start to build these donor profiles to see who we might go to for money. And this is particularly important for the high net worth donors where you have high touch, philanthropy, right? Where I'm spending a lot of time with donors and cultivating them, bringing them into my organization. And the other thing to think about is from the organizational perspective, we can take our own data or buy that data and make targeted pitches to existing donors. So maybe you haven't donated this year, you've lapsed in donations, but you're likely to fit the profile of someone who will donate. So you might be the person that I call first, and then we can have targeted recruitment of new donors. So when we're buying a list of potential donors or we're looking at census tracts to send mailings out to, we might look to see which neighborhoods, which donors actually fit these demographic profiles rather than just sampling on a particular independent variable. And then in terms of understanding who doesn't give, we can develop focus groups to look at why people don't give. Why are men not giving to women and girls causes? Is it because they don't know? Is it because they don't care? It sort of leads us to groups that we can ask this question to if we're interested in pursuing that. That's my optimistic. We can get people to give to causes, they just need to know about it. Or this could be a likely low return on investment, and if I have limited resources to do fundraising, I'm going to not target these particular groups because there might not be a return on investment, especially without a long-term strategy. So in case of the implications, having a holistic understanding of individual donors is sort of the point of using this method to understand philanthropy. I think it's also really important to note that the people who are engaged in collaboration are, again, more likely, these collaborative philanthropic efforts are more likely to give to these causes. They're also more likely to give to other marginalized groups. And that says something about this collective mindset, again, bringing in information, and so linking it back to this idea of collaboration. There seems to be something going on there that makes people give to those that don't look like them, perhaps because of the learning and engagement. And then, in thinking about philanthropy, this is something I think a lot about because I teach this. I was raising money for a number of years. How do we leverage data in a crowded market for donors? So if I can have any advantage in raising money and I can pull it from existing data, I want to utilize that so I'm targeting sort of the people who are going to be more warm to my cause. It doesn't mean I can't go, to those men and say, hey, you should give too, but I'm less likely to get a response from them. And then this also goes into sort of larger questions about finding allies for causes, right? If I'm raising money for women and girls causes, I probably am really thinking about women and girls, right? I'm really wanting to be an ally to them. And if I can identify people who aren't women and girls that might be allies to women and girls, I can cultivate that base, right? I can know who to go to. And hopefully in a long-term strategy, if I get those men that are in giving circles and get them to be an ally to my cause, maybe they can bring more men to the cause as well. Because again, we see these homophily or these ideas that people will associate with people that look like them. So how can I find allies and develop them so that I can sort of further my cause beyond this financial impact? And so we see similar patterns in giving to people of color and LGBTQ communities and other communities. So sort of a larger social perspective, this may help us uncover some of the patterns or causal complexity that leads for people to be associated with particular causes. That's all I have.